You ever stop and think about how a piece of everyday American history, something practiced by millions of people, could just vanish? Well, today, we're going to dig into the story of a patriotic gesture that was once as common as the Pledge of Allegiance itself, but has now been almost completely erased from our collective memory. Okay, so picture this. You're in an American school any morning between, say, 1892 and 1942. The students are reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, but they're not putting their hands over their hearts. Nope. Instead, they're extending their right arms forward, straight out, with their palms facing down. For a full half century, this was the standard way to salute the flag. Now, I know what you're thinking. When you look at that gesture today, it probably brings something, well, something very specific and pretty unsettling to mind. But here's the crazy part. The origin of this salute is 100% American. So how in the world did this patriotic symbol get created, and why did it disappear so completely? The answer, as you'll see, is a fascinating and really complicated story. All right, let's rewind the clock. To really get a handle on the salute, you first have to understand the Pledge of Allegiance, because the two were basically born together for a very specific national celebration. So you've got two main players here. The pledge itself was written back in 1892 by a guy named Francis Bellamy, who was a Baptist minister. He was working with this super popular magazine at the time, The Youth's Companion, to help promote patriotism in schools. And it was his editor, James B. Upham, who came up with the idea for a physical gesture to go along with the words, to create a whole patriotic ritual. And that gesture, that became known as the Bellamy Salute. For 50 years, people just called it the flag salute. It was the official, undisputed way to show respect for the flag while you were reciting the pledge. Now, this is a super interesting detail. The original instructions from the magazine describe it as a graceful gesture with the palm extended upward. Over time, it kind of evolved into the easier palm-down version we saw earlier, but the original idea was this open-handed gesture. Remember that palm-up part? It's a key detail. Okay, so here's how it actually worked. The instructions were really specific. You'd start with a military-style salute, right? Hand to the forehead. Then, right when you say the words, "to my flag," you'd extend your arm out towards the flag. It made it a really deliberate and physical act of patriotism. For decades, this was just a normal, all-American tradition. No controversy at all. But then, events happening thousands of miles away in Europe would cast this really dark shadow over the gesture, changing what it meant forever. See, in the 1920s, the Italian fascists adopted what they called the Roman salute. Then, just a decade later, the German Nazi Party adopted a very, very similar straight-arm salute. And just like that, America's homegrown patriotic gesture had a sinister European twin. And right here, you can see the problem, clear as day. On one side, you have a symbol of American liberty, created way back in 1892. And on the other, you have a nearly identical symbol adopted by totalitarian regimes decades later. The visual overlap was just undeniable, and it created this massive, incredibly uncomfortable controversy back in the United States. As you can imagine, this look-alike problem sparked a huge national debate. As tensions were rising over in Europe, Americans got more and more uncomfortable with their own salute. It was a problem that you just couldn't ignore. The whole country was really split. Some school boards, seeing the obvious issue, just started changing the salute themselves. But then other groups, like the Daughters of the American Revolution, they pushed back. Their whole argument was, hey, why should we have to change our traditional salute just because some foreign movements copied it? It was a real tug-of-war. And, of course, the controversy quickly turned into a political weapon. It was used by people who supported America getting involved in the growing war in Europe against those who argued for isolationism, a group that famously included the aviation hero Charles Lindbergh. And this is a perfect and kind of sneaky example of how the salute was used for propaganda. The historian A. Scott Berg explains that photographers would intentionally snap a picture of someone like Lindbergh doing the Bellamy salute, but they'd frame it just right to leave the American flag out of the shot. So to the public, the picture that came out was visually indistinguishable from the Nazi salute, a really powerful and pretty misleading political message. So by the time the U.S. officially enters World War II after Pearl Harbor, the resemblance wasn't just awkward anymore, it was completely unacceptable. The time had finally come for an official change. You can see on this timeline just how fast the end came. After being used for decades, Congress finally acted in 1942. Their first attempt in June actually kept a version of the arm-out salute, But that didn't stick. Just 6 months later, in December, they passed another law, and this time they got rid of it for good. And you know who was really pushing for this change? It was some of the country's most respected patriotic groups, the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Their support really helped make sure Congress made the decisive change, because they recognized that the old salute's meaning had been, well, permanently tainted by what was happening overseas. And so, the gesture we all know today, standing with your right hand over your heart, was officially written into law. The Bellamy Salute was retired. And amazingly, within a single generation, this once universal symbol of American patriotism pretty much vanished from public life and memory. Think about that for a second. For 50 years, millions of Americans saluted the flag in a way that would be absolutely shocking to us today. It's just a powerful reminder of how symbols can change their meaning and how fast history can be forgotten. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stories like this are out there just hiding in plain sight?